Off the eastern coast of South Africa, the continental shelf breaks unevenly, forming a series of submerged ridges that rise toward the surface and then fall away again. One of these formations lies several kilometers offshore, parallel to the KwaZulu-Natal coastline. From above, it is invisible. From the waterline, it offers no reference point. Beneath the surface, it alters currents, concentrates marine life, and reshapes the movement of the sea. The Indian Ocean here is rarely still. Warm water from the Agulhas Current moves southward along the coast, fast and narrow, carrying energy from the tropics. Where the current meets shallow rock, the flow bends and accelerates. Eddies form. Visibility shifts without warning. Conditions that appear stable can change within minutes. The nearest land is distant and low. Waves break there, but their sound does not carry. Boats operating in this area rely on precise positioning and constant awareness of drift. When engines stop, nothing anchors a vessel in place. At low tide, the shoal remains fully submerged. It cannot be stood upon. It offers no shelter. It exists only as altered water. Aliwal Shoal lies approximately 5 kilometers off the coast near Umkomaas, south of Durban. It is a fossilized sand dune system, formed when sea levels were lower, later submerged as the ocean advanced inland. Over time, the structure became a convergence point for marine life. Ragged-toothed sharks gather there seasonally. Tiger sharks and oceanic blacktips pass through. The site developed an international reputation, both for its biodiversity and for the difficulty of operating safely above it. By the early 2000s, Aliwal Shoal was firmly established as a premier dive location. It attracted recreational divers, technical divers, and underwater photographers from South Africa and abroad. Local dive operators ran daily charters, weather permitting. These operations followed standard open water procedures, but conditions at the shoal imposed additional constraints. Strong currents required negative entries. Surface intervals were managed tightly. Divers were expected to deploy surface marker buoys during ascent to help boats track their position. The diver involved in this incident was not inexperienced. According to operator records and subsequent reporting, the individual had completed formal certification and had logged multiple ocean dives prior to arriving at Aliwal Shoal. The dive itself was not experimental. It followed a common profile used at the site, planned to remain within recreational depth limits. Equipment was standard for the region: a single-cylinder setup, buoyancy compensator, regulator, fins, mask, and wetsuit suitable for the warm Indian Ocean water. No redundant breathing system was carried, as none was required for the dive plan. The group entered the water from a rigid inflatable boat, the typical platform used at the shoal. These vessels are fast and maneuverable, designed to approach a GPS-marked drop point, deploy divers quickly, and then track bubbles or marker buoys from the surface. The system depends on coordination and timing. Divers descend promptly. The boat maintains position by adjusting for drift. Communication is visual and procedural rather than verbal. The motivation for the dive was straightforward. Visibility had been reported as good earlier that day. Marine activity was expected. There was no unusual objective beyond observation. For divers visiting Aliwal Shoal, this was the reason they came: a controlled exposure to a high-energy marine environment under professional supervision. Despite its reputation, most dives at the shoal end without incident. Operators emphasize discipline rather than danger. Briefings focus on currents, ascent protocols, and the importance of staying with the group. Emergency scenarios are discussed, including the possibility of surface drift, but these are presented as contingencies, not expectations. Weather conditions that morning were within operational limits. Wind was moderate. Swell was present but manageable. The Agulhas Current, as always, was moving steadily south. Nothing in the pre-dive assessment suggested a deviation from routine. The distance from shore, however, remained a constant. At 5 kilometers offshore, a diver on the surface is not visible from land. Even a boat at idle can drift rapidly if not actively maneuvering. In this environment, separation does not require catastrophe. It requires only a small misalignment between descent, current, and surface tracking. The dive began as planned. The entry was conducted quickly, as required at Aliwal Shoal. Divers rolled backward from the inflatable boat and descended immediately, minimizing surface drift. The boat remained above the drop point, adjusting position as bubbles appeared and disappeared below the surface. For the first part of the dive, the system functioned as intended. Conditions underwater were variable. The current was present but not uniform, moving in layers. At depth, it was manageable. Closer to the surface, it moved faster. Visibility shifted laterally rather than vertically, a known feature of the shoal. These factors were not unusual, but they reduced the margin for error. As the dive progressed, the group began its ascent. Standard procedure required each diver to deploy a surface marker buoy before reaching the surface. These buoys serve as the primary visual reference for the boat crew, allowing them to track individuals as they complete safety stops and surface. At some point during the ascent, separation occurred. The precise sequence is not fully documented. What is known is that one diver surfaced at a position that did not align with the boat's immediate tracking path. Whether the marker buoy was delayed, obscured by swell, or drifted laterally before full deployment is uncertain. Surface conditions can interfere with visibility even when protocols are followed correctly. The inflatable boat recovered the majority of the group. The crew continued standard scanning procedures, circling and checking for remaining markers. In an area with multiple dive operations and intermittent surface chop, distinguishing a single diver's position can take time. During this interval, the current continued to carry surface objects southward. A diver floating passively moves faster than expected, especially when waves and wind add lateral force. Distance accumulates quietly. By the time the absence was confirmed, the diver was no longer within the immediate recovery radius. The boat initiated a wider search pattern, but the visual field was limited. The shoal offers no fixed reference points. The horizon is uniform. A human head and marker buoy occupy a small fraction of that space. From that moment, the diver was alone on the surface, several kilometers offshore, moving steadily with the current. Return by swimming was not feasible. Remaining visible was the only available strategy. Once separation occurred, the diver's situation stabilized into a single, unchanging reality. There was no immediate crisis. Breathing was controlled. Equipment remained intact. The water temperature was survivable for extended exposure. The danger lay not in a sudden event, but in duration. At Aliwal Shoal, a diver who surfaces away from the boat has few options. Swimming against the Agulhas Current is ineffective. The flow can exceed 4 knots near the surface, far faster than any sustained swimming effort. Conservation of energy becomes essential. The correct response is flotation, visibility, and restraint. The diver inflated the buoyancy compensator fully and remained vertical in the water, a posture that keeps the airway clear while minimizing effort. The surface marker buoy was kept upright as long as possible, acting as both a visual signal and a stabilizing reference. In moderate swell, even a brightly colored marker can disappear between waves. Timing visibility to wave crests increases detection range, but it also requires constant attention. Hours passed without confirmation of detection. The sun moved higher. The water reflected light unevenly, making it difficult to judge distance or direction. Boats appeared intermittently on the horizon, but none approached close enough to indicate recognition. At that range, it is impossible to determine whether a vessel is moving toward or away from a person in the water. Physiologically, the first challenge was dehydration. Immersion reduces the sensation of thirst, but fluid loss continues through respiration and exposure. Saltwater contact accelerates drying of the lips and mouth. Swallowing seawater is not an option, it increases dehydration and can induce nausea. The diver managed this by limiting unnecessary movement and breathing steadily. Heat management followed. Although the Indian Ocean is warm, prolonged exposure leads to heat loss, especially when wind increases evaporation. The wetsuit slowed this process but did not stop it. The diver periodically adjusted position to reduce surface area exposed to wind, keeping arms close to the body and minimizing splashing. Mental discipline became as important as physical management. Panic increases breathing rate and accelerates fatigue. Training emphasizes recognition of this response and conscious correction. The diver focused on measurable tasks, maintaining buoyancy, keeping the marker visible, scanning the horizon methodically. This structure replaces unproductive thought with routine. As time extended beyond the expected pickup window, uncertainty increased. Dive operators are trained to initiate search procedures when a diver is unaccounted for, but these procedures depend on timely recognition and clear last known position data. In open water, search areas expand quickly. A single hour of drift can move a person several kilometers from the initial point. The diver did not know whether a formal search had begun. From the water, there is no feedback. Aircraft, if deployed, are often heard before they are seen, but sound travels inconsistently over waves. The absence of information creates cognitive strain, but speculation serves no purpose. The only actionable strategy remained visibility. The marker buoy was repositioned repeatedly to keep it upright. When arms tired, the diver rested them briefly on the inflated buoyancy compensator. Muscle cramps are common during prolonged flotation, especially in the legs. Small adjustments helped delay this, alternating tension and relaxation to maintain circulation. Marine life was present but unremarkable. Sharks are common at Aliwal Shoal, but surface incidents involving divers are rare. No aggressive behavior was reported in this case. The diver remained still, avoiding splashing that could attract attention. Awareness of surroundings was maintained without fixation. As daylight progressed, glare increased. The sun's position made it difficult for observers on boats to spot low-contrast objects. Conversely, the diver could use reflected light to track vessels at greater distances. Each appearance of a hull or wake triggered renewed signaling effort, raising the marker buoy and adjusting posture to maximize profile. Fatigue accumulated gradually. Holding position against swell requires constant micro-adjustments. The neck and lower back bear much of the strain. The diver shifted between upright and semi-reclined positions, using the buoyancy compensator as support. These changes were deliberate, timed to breathing cycles. At some point, the marker buoy became harder to keep vertical. Grip strength declined. Rather than forcing it, the diver prioritized airway security, allowing the buoy to trail slightly while maintaining contact. Losing the marker entirely would reduce detection probability significantly, but exhausting the arms would compromise flotation. The water temperature, while warm initially, began to feel cooler as exposure continued. Shivering did not dominate, but muscle stiffness increased. The wetsuit provided insulation, but its effectiveness decreases as water circulates inside it. Remaining still reduced flushing. Throughout this period, the diver avoided unnecessary decisions. There was no attempt to swim toward land or toward distant boats. Such efforts would consume energy without improving outcome. Training emphasizes that rescue is most likely when the diver remains near the surface and visible. Drift is inevitable, but search patterns account for current vectors. Time perception changed. Without reference points, hours blend together. The sun's movement was the only reliable indicator of progression. The diver monitored this passively, noting changes in light rather than counting minutes. Eventually, environmental conditions shifted. Wind increased slightly, altering wave patterns. This reduced surface smoothness and further complicated visibility. At the same time, it expanded the audible range of engines. Sound carried intermittently, distorted by wind and wave direction. When a vessel finally approached within a range that suggested recognition, the diver intensified signaling. The marker buoy was raised fully. One arm was extended above the head when possible, then rested again. These movements were economical, timed to conserve strength. Rescue did not occur immediately upon first approach. Boats at Aliwal Shoal often service multiple divers and may change course for reasons unrelated to a person in the water. The diver maintained signaling without assuming intent. Only when a vessel altered course directly and closed distance did confirmation become possible. By then, exposure had taken a measurable toll. Muscles were stiff. Fine motor control was reduced. Speech, if attempted, would have been difficult. The diver focused on maintaining airway position until physical assistance arrived. Throughout the ordeal, survival depended less on dramatic action than on adherence to procedure. Equipment functioned as designed. Training guided behavior. The environment remained indifferent. The outcome hinged on endurance and visibility over time. As daylight declined, the diver's margin for survival narrowed. The sun's lowering angle reduced glare but also shortened the window for visual detection. At sea level, a human head becomes difficult to distinguish beyond short distances even in ideal light. As evening approached, the probability of being seen decreased steadily. Temperature management became more complex. Air temperatures dropped faster than water temperatures, increasing convective heat loss from exposed surfaces. Wind intensified the effect. The wetsuit continued to provide insulation, but prolonged immersion reduced its efficiency. Muscle stiffness increased, particularly in the legs and lower back, making position changes slower and more deliberate. Fatigue was now the dominant factor. Holding the airway clear required continuous engagement. Even with full buoyancy inflation, waves periodically washed over the face. Each instance required controlled breathing and repositioning. Coughing or aspirating seawater would increase risk, so movements remained conservative. Dehydration worsened. The diver's mouth and throat were dry. Swallowing became uncomfortable. These symptoms were expected but could not be corrected. The focus shifted from mitigation to tolerance. Breathing remained slow and shallow to reduce moisture loss. Psychological pressure increased without dramatic change. There was no panic, but there was accumulation. Each passing interval without recovery added weight to physical sensation. The absence of reference points made it difficult to estimate remaining daylight. The diver relied on peripheral cues rather than conscious calculation. At night, standard search operations become more complex. Visual scanning is limited. Spotlights and flares are effective only at close range. The diver had no illumination device suitable for surface signaling. Remaining visible was still possible, but the probability of detection dropped further with each minute. The body responded by prioritizing essential function. Movements became smaller. Grip strength declined. The marker buoy, though still retained, was harder to control. The diver allowed it to trail while maintaining contact, conserving energy for airway management. Time lost structure. Without visual confirmation of rescue efforts, the diver could not know whether a search was active or suspended. This uncertainty did not change behavior. The same routine continued: flotation, breathing, minimal movement. Eventually, engine noise became more distinct. Sound traveled irregularly, but proximity was clearer than before. The diver raised the marker buoy again, using remaining strength to increase profile. When a spotlight finally crossed the water nearby, it did not immediately settle on the diver. Light reflects unpredictably off waves. Recognition occurred only at close range. A vessel altered course and slowed. At that point, the diver no longer attempted sustained signaling. Energy was reserved for maintaining position until assistance arrived. Recovery from the water required help. Hands reached down. The diver was supported, then lifted partially, then fully aboard. Movements were careful, controlled, and quiet. There was no immediate verbal exchange of significance. Assessment began as soon as the diver was stable on deck. The night continued, but the period of exposure had ended. Once aboard the vessel, the diver's condition was evaluated methodically. There were no signs of acute injury. Breathing was intact. Consciousness was clear. The primary concerns were exposure, dehydration, and fatigue. Wet equipment was loosened to reduce constriction, and the diver was positioned to retain body heat. The boat returned toward shore at controlled speed. During transit, monitoring continued without urgency. This was not an emergency extraction but a recovery following prolonged exposure. Vital signs stabilized gradually as circulation improved. Shivering diminished as insulation and shelter took effect. Upon arrival, medical personnel conducted a secondary assessment. No decompression illness was indicated. The dive profile, combined with the extended surface interval, made this unlikely. There was no evidence of seawater aspiration beyond minor irritation. Skin showed early signs of salt exposure and chafing, but no breakdown. The incident was documented by the dive operator and local authorities. Timing, environmental conditions, and recovery details were recorded. Search procedures were reviewed against standard practice. No procedural violations were identified. The event was classified as a surface separation with delayed recovery, a known but infrequent outcome in high-current offshore diving. The diver did not require hospitalization. After observation, release followed. Physical recovery continued over the following days, marked primarily by muscle soreness and fatigue rather than lasting injury. The sea state returned to normal within hours. Boats resumed operations. The shoal remained unchanged. What had occurred was not extraordinary in mechanism. It was notable only in duration. Survival resulted from equipment functioning as intended and from adherence to established procedures over an extended period. Aliwal Shoal continues to be dived regularly. Its reputation persists, shaped by strong currents, variable visibility, and distance from land rather than by frequent incidents. Most divers who enter the water there return to the boat within minutes of surfacing. Separation remains an exception, not a rule. This incident did not introduce new hazards or alter established understanding of the site. It reaffirmed known constraints. Offshore environments are indifferent to experience level once a person is alone on the surface. Survival depends less on strength than on restraint, procedure, and time. The diver's endurance was not a product of exceptional action. It reflected ordinary training applied without deviation. Buoyancy equipment maintained flotation. The marker buoy provided intermittent visibility. The decision to remain passive conserved energy. These elements are standard, but their effectiveness is measured only when conditions extend beyond expectation. From a historical perspective, the event occupies a narrow space. It did not result in loss of life. It did not change regulation. It did not become widely known outside professional circles. Its value lies in confirmation rather than warning. The water allowed survival because nothing failed. Currents moved as predicted. Equipment functioned within design limits. Search procedures, though delayed by environment, remained persistent. In the absence of drama, the outcome stands as a quiet example of how survival at sea often occurs, slowly, without control, and without witnesses, until it ends.